It was hell's season, and the air smelled of burning children. This smell was what had destroyed Dan Lambert's taste for barbecued pork sandwiches. Before August of 1969, the year he'd turned 20, his favorite food had been barbecue crispy at the edges and drenched with sloppy red sauce. After the 11th day of that month, the smell of it was enough to make him sick to death. He was driving east through Shreveport on 70th Street, into the glare of the morning sun. It glanced off the hood of his gray pickup truck and stabbed his eyes, inflaming the slow ache in his skull. He knew this pain and its vagaries. Sometimes it came upon him like a brute with a hammer, sometimes like a surgeon with a precise scalpel. During the worst times, it hit and ran like a Mack truck, and all he could do was chew on his rage and lie there until his body came back to him. It was a hard thing, dying was. In this August of 1991, a summer that had been one of the hottest in Louisiana's long history of hellish seasons, Dan was 42 years old. He looked 10 years older, his raw-boned, heavily lined face a testament to his ceaseless combat with pain. It was a fight he knew he couldn't win. If he knew for certain he would live 3 more years, he wasn't sure if he'd be happy about it. Right now it was day to day. Some days were all right, some weren't worth a bucket of warm spit. But it wasn't in his nature to give up, no matter how tough things got. His father, the quitter, had not raised a quitter. In this, at least, Dan could find strength. He drove on along the arrow straight line of 70th Street, past strip malls and car lots and fast food joints. He drove on into the merciless sun and the smell of murdered innocents. Lining the commercial carnival of 70th Street was a score of barbecue restaurants, and it was from their kitchen chimneys that this odor of burned flesh rose into the scalded sky. It was just after 9. And already the temperature sign in front of the Friendship Bank of Louisiana read 86 degrees. The sky was cloudless, but was more white than blue, as if all the color had been bleached from it. The sun was a burnished ball of pewter, the promise of another day of misery across the Gulf states. Yesterday the temperature had hit 102, and Dan figured that today it was going to be hot enough to fry pigeons on the wing. Afternoon showers passed through every few days, but it was just enough to steam the streets. The Red River flowed its muddy course through Shreveport to the bayou country, and the air shimmered over the larger buildings that stood iron gray against the horizon. Dan had to stop for a red light. The pickup's brakes squealed a little, in need of new pads. A job replacing rotten lumber on a patio deck last week had made him enough to pay the month's rent and utilities, and he'd had a few dollars left over for groceries. Still, some things had to slide. He'd missed 2 payments on the pickup, and he needed to go in and see Mr. Jarrett to work something out. Mr. Jarrett, the loan manager at the First Commercial Bank, understood that Dan had fallen on hard times and cut him some slack. The pain was back behind his eyes. It lived there like a hermit crab. Dan reached beside himself on the seat, picked up the white bottle of Excedrin and popped it open. He shook 2 tablets onto his tongue and chewed them. The light turned green and he drove on toward Death Valley. Dan wore a rust-colored short-sleeved shirt and blue jeans with patches on the knees. Under a faded blue baseball cap, his thinning brown hair was combed back from his forehead and spilled over his shoulders. Haircuts were not high on his list of priorities. He had light brown eyes and a close-cropped beard that was almost all gray.